everyone. We are from Javelin Wealth Management, and this is part of our 20th conversation series. We have Andrew Crombie here from Crombie Consulting, and today we'll be sharing more on great wealth transfer. So when we kick it off, Andrew, do you want to share more about yourself and why this topic means to you?
Great, okay, no problem. Hi, I'm Andrew Crombie, as you know, and I'm a brand and business strategist. So what does that mean? I create new brands and I refresh old brands. And because brands are so central to businesses and how they're seen and how they operate in the marketplace, I get very closely involved with what that means in terms of the business strategy and how it's going to navigate the future. And so, you know, the topic that we're talking about, the great wealth transfer, which has been a topic of conversation for a few years now, but seems to be gaining strength as we get closer and closer to it, or further and further into it. Why it's interesting is because as a brand person, I'm naturally attuned to looking at consumers, looking at people, and how they, you know, what they're thinking, what's driving them. And what we're seeing, obviously, is as us boomers get older and we've got the Gen Z and millennials coming through, very different generations, and the decisions they're making, the receipt of so much money. So what we have effectively is we have the wealthiest of the largest transfer of money ever, going from the wealthiest generation ever to the most technologically savvy, best educated, largest generation ever. And that's very significant from a world change point of view. And it's not just from a professional interest. Obviously, I have to have that because that's what I do. But it's from just a personal interest. I mean, it is going to profoundly change the way our world is shaped over the next 10 to 15 years.
Okay, right. I think that's an interesting topic as well. I as a millennial, am also involved in this sea change of transfer of wealth, or also at Javelin, we also manage wealth. So there are important aspects that we can pick up from this. As we proceed into this topic, maybe you can share more about like the different demographics, what you see, what do you think are the traits that characterize them from each other?
Okay, I suppose the first thing to do is to understand exactly. One of the most confusing things for us is people talk about boomers, they talk about Gen Xers, seem to get forgotten in the mix. And then you've got millennials, and then you've got Gen Z, and now you've got Generation Alpha. So there's all these generations, they've all got slightly different traits. So I'll start from the beginning. So boomers, basically anyone born between 1946 and 1964. Okay, then you've got Gen X, the ones that never seem to enter the conversation for some reason. They really suffer because they're immediately behind the boomers. So they're 1965 through till 1980, effectively. Then you've got millennials, 1981 to 96, and Gen Z from 97 through to 2012. And then Generation Alpha, but not really that influential, although becoming quickly influential, from 2013 onwards, okay, up until 2035, I think it is, or 2030 or something like that. So you've got big generations. Now, why is it interesting? So 900 million boomers versus 1.8 billion 900 million boomers versus 1.8 billion millennials and 2.6 billion Gen Zers. So, you know, it's quite a lot, almost half the global population are millennials or Gen Zers. Okay, so you've got the wealthiest, small, concentrated, who own 70% of the global wealth, transferring to the 2.6 million of the millennials who own 5% of global wealth. Quite significant shift in money. So what's the difference? So boomers, we grew up post-war, very optimistic. Obviously, business regaining its stability after the war, and everything was growth. So in marketing terms, you basically just made a product and it was always going to be sold because the demand was so strong. So everything was very positive. There were always more jobs than there were available than there were people to fill them. And it was about the accumulation of material things to build quality of life. And you plot it right through the 60s and early 70s, you get that. Gen Zers sort of drop out of here, but because they follow on sort of in between the boomers and millennials. But then you get millennials. So millennials who came in around about 80, 81, the early millennials are now 40 odd years old, 41 years old, 42 years old. So they've changed over their time. So they started off being quite rebellious in their views, and then as they got older, like we all do, they started to become more like their parents. Okay, so they started to have responsibilities like family, work, jobs, and stuff like that. And then, of course, Gen Zers have come along, and they've been doing the same. As they're getting older, they're starting to slowly follow the millennials. What's very interesting about those groups, so the millennials, as a bit of a reaction to the boomers, so 2 generations ahead of them.
Is it positive or negative?
It's positive. It depends how you look at it, obviously. The millennials are very positive in terms of their view of the world. They want to do right by the world, sustainability. They're much more about values and family values. And this is a reaction because they saw the incredible materialism and the wealth and all of the boomers who their life expectancy increased, so they've been staying in their jobs till later. They've been taking all of the nice position. And the millennials are coming into the world and finding it very hard to get into work. And then you've got the Gen Zers. They're just coming in, a larger population, trying to get into the workforce as well. So the nice thing about them is that they've reacted. They're saying, well, you boomers wrecked the world for us, and so we're now going to do something about it. We're going to more at sustainability. And we're seeing that coming through in terms of the way that they're spending, the way that they're setting up their careers. So very different. The millennials and the boomers, the Gen Zers. If you look at Gen Z, so millennials, your end, let's say the end of the millennials, are very technologically savvy. You share a lot of the technological things with the Gen Zers because you were born into it. And your first memories were pretty much, when you were 10 or whatever, or 20 or 15, iPhone was there. So you pretty much had it all of your free thinking time of your life. And Gen Zers have had it since day one. Okay, so they are already technologically savvy. They live in a digital world. They've also seen their parents who've worked for 30 years in companies be let go in the GFC and then subsequently, more recently, COVID. They've seen problems with that. So this idea of trust in institutions has gone.
Yeah.
And that's burnt them. And so the idea that they look to authority figures like boomers used to for, say, investment advice or how to live their lives, and that has changed. It's now become much more peer-to-peer. I believe you probably feel the same way. You look to what's happening in your social circles, what's happening around the world. You have global immediate access to information. And so vastly different MOs between boomers and millennials and Gen Zers, with the Gen Xers sort of lost in the middle.
Yeah. Just go back to the demographics wise. You mentioned millennials and Gen Z, they outnumber the boomers by a significant percentage, almost twice, right?
But just about much.
Yeah, but within that distribution, is that population of millennials and Gen Z, is it concentrated in the developed nations or is it worldwide? So I'm asking because maybe the wealth transfer could be skewed towards, as in we have a much bigger population of millennials and Gen Z, but maybe it's in other developing nations.
Okay, so I think, very interesting point, because the younger populations tend to be in the developing nations. Okay, so with less wealth transfer.
Yeah.
Although that's changing, it's changing fast. Whereas you've got older populations with smaller groups coming through now, where you've got a rapidly aging populations in a lot of the developed countries. So there is a bit of a difference there. Asia has, I think it's 42% of global wealth, and yet a lot of the Asian countries are skewed very heavily to younger populations. So there will be different dynamics there. So I think that's going to change it, but at the first world level, where it's a global concept, wealth tends to be horizontal, whereas they're less vertical in concept. Everyone, if you're wealthy in China, you're probably similar to wealthy in the US or wealthy elsewhere. So you're going to share a lot more traits. And the wealthy will be passing down. If you're in China, the biggest difference between Asia and the rest of the world, I think, is more importantly, is that in almost all markets except for the developing markets like Asia, they've had 2 or 3 or 4 generations of wealth transfer before, so they sort of have it ingrained slightly.
Yeah.
Whereas in Asia, I think about 50% of it will be mostly first generational transfer. First time they've had wealth to transfer, that's going to be quite significant.
The Europeans are quite, I would say, experienced in these wealth transfers, right? So you're proceeding, you have 4th or 5th generation of wealth transfers, whereas in Asia we don't see that as much because the wealth hasn't been built up until recently.
That's right. So end of the 20th century, you started to see accumulation of wealth in Asian countries and developing countries. Principally markets like Singapore, Hong Kong, you've got Malaysia and Thailand, and that there's sort of wealth behind. Yeah. And obviously China, which has just blown everyone away. You've got Vietnam coming on and so on. So there's more wealth in those markets. Japan was ahead of it. No one ever includes Japan and Asia when you talk about this. It's its own island in every respect. They're not as experienced, but it doesn't mean that they're good. There's the old adage that one generation builds it, one takes it it solidifies it, and the third generation sort of loses it in wealth, and that is a legitimate concern that they have. One of the big points here with the Gen Z is that because of the time when boomers got their wealth, their parents weren't living very long. So they were getting wealth earlier in their lives, and obviously post-war and that you had a lot of people losing their parents and their fathers, whatever. So wealth transfer was happening earlier. Then boomers came along, and all of a sudden they, instead of dying at 65 or 67 or whatever, all of a sudden they're dying in their late, in their 80s and 90s. So these millennials have had to hang on, and they've never had the experience of managing. And Gen Xers have never really had the experience of being the sole guardian of the family's wealth. And because of that, the level of experience that's been handed down within the families is not that good. Okay, so hence reliance on, you've just seen family offices go through the roof in Singapore.
Yeah.
It's happening everywhere. Family offices, the threshold for entry for a family office, I understand, has dropped massively. It used to be about $5 million or something, and now it's like $500,000 people are setting up family offices. That's a global phenomenon, but it's very concentrated in Singapore. You might have seen the news this morning.
In Asia. Yeah.
Well, so Asia has 9% of the family offices in the world, quoting them.
But the rate of growth is massive.
Massive, and Singapore has 59% of all global offices in Asia, and that's only recent. So that's really only in the last couple of years. It's doubled through COVID. It was doubling just about every year, the number of applications.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting because there's a Chinese phrase that says 富过不及三代, which means wealth never passes beyond 3 generations.
Okay,
yeah.
Same
I think
concept.
Precisely what you mentioned as well. Right? But talking about wealth transfer, or rather, so there's one thing to transfer wealth, there's another if the attitudes of parents or the earlier generations, are they willing to pass on, say, assets or even businesses to the next generation?
That's interesting. I'm very interested in your view on this because obviously I need to sort of look at the global research and the big players, the Deloittes and the EYs and Harvard Business Review and stuff like that. The general view is that, so in the past what's happened is that the holders of the wealth, the boomers, haven't necessarily, in some families, more enlightened families that are used to handing it down, they tend to include their children. One of the traits of these families is they tend to include their children in their business and investment management decisions. But ones that are less experienced tend to hold their wealth and manage it. And quite often these people are getting inheritances and they weren't even aware of the size or what to do with it. And it's a shock to the system. So, that can be quite difficult for these. All of a sudden they're very wealthy and they don't know how to live with it. Endless stories about people who've received instant wealth and then gone broke before they knew it because had no idea how to do it. Education through the generations is going to be critical, and especially now. I was reading one stat that said that Gen's, interesting, I think it was Investopedia or someone, or ABC it could have been, was saying that they did an assessment of Gen Zers. I think something like 30% had said that they felt that they were adequate at being able to manage wealth when they received it. They could manage it well. But then when they tested them on objective measures, like asking proper management questions, they failed dismally. It was like only about 10% or something.
Yeah.
And it shows the gap in perceptions on being able to do it versus the actual skill set of being able to do it. So I think we're going to see a very large need for education in the space.
So, like, interesting question is that because as a digital native, we are being inundated with so much resources, especially on the internet and even on social platforms like TikTok these days. So it is both a blessing because on one hand you have access to like a great wealth of resources that the earlier generation may not have, but now you have too much information, or rather, recently also false information.
Yeah.
I mean, people are going on like TikTok to get their investment or financial advice, which if you take a look at some of them, it's horrendous, I would say.
Yep.
Like they're asking you to leverage up, get a house, and then mortgage the house and buy a house. Like one of the horrible examples I've seen so far. So I was just curious as to how do you think like the next generation can get better informed in making these investment decisions?
Yeah, so a really interesting point. So the problem with lots of information, I mean, there's tons out there. You get onto YouTube or get onto anything. There's always someone who's done the top things to avoid when you're doing this, or the 10 top things to do to invest well and you retire at 20 sort of thing. The problem with these is that you've got no way, unless you know what you're dealing with, you've got no way of independently validating that this is good information or good advice versus poor advice. And that's a real issue. So, as I was saying, when you're a postgraduate student, you're a much better student than when you're an undergraduate because you know what's relevant. Especially if you've done a couple of years of work, you can sift out the good stuff and you see, and then you understand how it fits in the context and you can use it to advantage. But without that knowledge, without the experience, it's just noise coming at you and you're impressed by the best delivery in many cases. So education, so I come back to it, education is going to be absolutely fundamentally important and especially important with this generation because they are dealing with massive amounts of money and they're probably the least skilled of the last generations in handling it. So it's going to be very, very important that stuff's provided. Now, who provides it? Is it part of the school? Do we change the education program? I don't know. But it done well, and the way, because of the Gen Zers, because of their values-led system, especially post-COVID, I mean, that's just reinforced everyone's tendency towards community and the environment and living better and well, more healthily, and less sort of profligately. That we're going to see, if we can get this younger generation to invest properly and the way that they want to invest, because they do want to invest, then it could turn out very well for the planet, provided they've got the skills.
So I'm hearing there's two things. One is the ability to invest properly, and then another part is the way and attitudes which the next generation invests in. So, I mean, you've covered some points, and I do resonate with them as well. Like we are looking for things like sustainability, caring for the environment, ensuring that we're not just profit chasers as what the previous generation has shown. Like how have you seen that, at least in the branding aspect in the US, and also how that?
So you touched on some very good points there. So Gen Z are typified by the general feeling that, and Gen Z millennials, the general feeling that boomers screwed up the planet. They're sort of avarice and they're out for a good time and spending money on material things but obviously not always their fault because of blind populations, the introduction of plastic and all of these things were hot topics at the time, and it took a while before everyone realised that wasn't exactly the best decision to make. So it's not all their fault, but it's on their watch, shall we say. Gen Zers, millennials are seeing it very differently. They need to correct the planet. They need to do it fast. They need to set up a nice environment for them to have children to bring into the world, into a world that's going to still be here. They have, as I said earlier, they've been burnt by, they're nervous about the financial institutions, the stability. And so, I've forgotten the exact statistic, but around about half of them believe that they will never retire. and most of them are carrying a lot of student debt,
Yeah.
and they don't have much money. I understand the spending power of Gen Z and millennials is about 86% less than it was for boomers. So all of these things are starting to affect them. So they're now looking more long term. They're saying that if I get investment, I will. If I get the funds from the transfer, I will invest it in my retirement, cover off my initial debt, invest the rest. They're much more frugal, sensible. They're investing in quality as opposed to flashiness. So luxury is still a good thing, but it's buying quality. So it's back to almost 30s and 50s values from the 1930s, 1950s. So the big thing is that they're how do we see this coming out so as I said, longer term investments, they don't really know what they're doing, so they're going to need educating. But in terms of their purchases, they're looking at, so in terms of investing in companies, they're sustainability, impact investing. So we've seen impact investing double from 20% of in Asia assets under management in 2020, from 20% to 41% in 2021. By 2025, it'll be a third of global assets under management will be impact investing. I mean, this is just taking off. They're looking for, obviously, companies that are abiding by the ESG codes and fitting with the various reporting requirements, especially public companies. They're looking for multiple bottom lines, so share price isn't the only return that they're looking for. They're looking for impact in the environment. They're looking more for stakeholder models rather than shareholder-based models of corporate structures and sort of mentalities. In terms of products, they're looking for sustainable sources. So obviously you've seen the alt protein, which is why I'm doing a lot of work at the moment.
Yeah.
Alternative protein. So moving away from meat, moving away from traditional food, looking for more sustainable solutions that are still expecting great taste solutions, but not going to kill the planet. Transparency, so supply chain, diversity in terms of staff, making sure that there's fair pay and fair trade all the way up to source and so on. So all of these things are all very good. They're they're supporting causes and movements that are around, and brands that are supportive of the planet. So obviously the best example of that's Patagonia. Various others. We've got Karuma shoes. They plant a tree for every time you buy a pair of shoes, and all of these fantastic initiatives that are coming through, and they're being very strongly led by Gen Z. Now, it's not to say that millennials and boomers are not doing this. Boomers, if they're one thing, they're very good at following the latest trend. So they're fast followers of what Gen Z are now driving.
Yeah.
One other interesting fact about millennials and boomers in this space is that, as I said earlier, that millennials and Gen Zers are sort of becoming like their parents as we do. The old saying that you become like your parents. So don't criticise them too much.
This is a better version?
Well, this is the better version, yeah. So the one thing that millennials have not changed, they were very strong on sustainability right from the outset. And even though they had much more aggressive views on how to change the world at the beginning, they've tempered those as they got older. Gen Zers are tending to do the same. But the one thing that didn't change was their focus on sustainability.
Okay.
That's for millennials. And Gen Zers started at a much more sustainability focus and are, again, not tempering that at all. So what you're seeing is a much greater focus on this. So I think that the interesting thing, why it's interesting, is that you've got all this money coming in to people who believe very differently in the way the world should be run, and money makes decisions. So you watch the money flows and the way, so the companies that get invested in, the technologies that get invested in, the fact that these young guys don't trust the big organisations, so they're going to start up they're going to favour innovation and startups. Not all will fly, but there's going to be a lot of growth because of that. And that's going to profoundly change the world that we live in.
Yeah, I definitely see that, at least in my peer group or even in myself, like there's a need for sustainability. And as millennials, they start to have their children, then they start to think, what kind of environment would I want to, or what would I bring them up in, right? So there's definitely a tilt towards environmental or sustainability. But I do recognize that there's also a lack of trust with maybe even governments, financial institutions, the BlackRocks or other super large corporations. And skepticism is definitely on the front now when they see things like ESG. They are concern about greenwashing and things like that. So definitely, much more skeptical. If they can't find a avenue that is able to support their cause, either they'll create it or to get their hands dirty.
Correct, that's right. I mean, how do you see it if you're investing in stuff? Do you, or show me? In fact, it's an interesting thing because Gen Zers actually invest a lot of their money versus, say, the boomers who always thought the future was going to get better and better, so they didn't tend to invest. But Gen Zers and late millennials tend to be quite good on saving. They're very frugal. They're investing for retirement from 10 years younger on average than the boomers started.
Yeah.
So it's a big difference in the mentality around that. But how do you find it? Are you making decisions based on, do you look at sustainability reports, ESG reports?
For me, I wouldn't say I would look specifically at sustainability. What I would look at is there a certain cause that I find that I value and it aligns with my goals and what I want to see for the future. Right. So for example, if I think maybe clean energy or even nuclear energy is the way forward, then I would put my money there. So in some aspects, it's less of getting returns. I mean, returns is definitely part of the picture, but in some sense, it's also like using my money to vote for things. Right? Yeah. So there's a term that in the finance industry is like in short term, the market is a voting machine. Right? But I find that many of my peers and even myself are using that for a longer term perspective as well. So that is something that I would look at.
I think that's it. I mean, that's a great phrase. So as I was saying before, so the next 15 years is going to be profound change. And that's because the people who view the world this way will have the money. I mean, the boomers are going to be dropping off. I'm at the tail end of the boomers. And, if we're lucky, live another 30 years, but it's highly likely you won't. On average, you won't. You'll probably 10 or 20. And, so that money is going to be increasingly with the people who are making the decisions in the organisations, driving the technological agenda. At a younger age, we're going to be the passengers. We're no longer the driver. Well, in fact, no longer the drivers for a while, I think. So it's going to be profoundly interesting.
But there's another interesting side really. So I think, or at least from my understanding, there's like a positive millennials who see the need and want to meet the need, whether it be a better world for their children or environmentally wise. We need to make sure that we cut CO2 exposures and things like that. But there's also another side, like that's just given up on life, like Gen Z and millennials. So the internet subculture, they coin them the doomers.
Right.
Yeah, because it's just all doom and gloom. They read the reports or statistics, like at the median age for boomers, this is done by the Federal Reserve. Median age of boomers when they were 35, they own 31% of the entire US real estate value. But right now, the median age for millennials is about like 30, 31, and they only own 4%. They are faced with crippling student debt. They have sky high rents to pay and struggling to find jobs. Right. So all this negativity, they just like.
And that's exacerbated by social media. So they hear all of that, they read all of that, they know that, they feel that, and yet every second page is some influencer living the life they've always wanted.
Yes.
And I mean, which is the reason why mental health and anxiety. So anxiety amongst Gen Zers is 55 to 60% state that they're very anxious and they're very nervous about the future. I mean, that's terrifying. To think, if I was thinking of my kids, they're all anxious as hell. I mean, so mental health and that. But I suppose the upside of all of this, so you can flip that whole narrative, that this is the danger. If that's all you're hearing and that's all you're seeing, which is, and obviously media influence, is critical to forming people's views and so on, because they only know what they hear, what they think. And everything's about perceptions, which comes back to full circle to the brand thing. All brands are, all businesses are, they're just perceptions until they become tangible. There's some very positive outcomes to come out of this. So the first is that, one, the millennials and Gen Zers who do have these views will soon have the money. It's not going to be very long, 10 years to wait. Now, it's pity the boomers have lived so long, and even the tail end of the generation beforehand, the silent generation. But the beauty is that money's coming to the people who've got the right value system for this. The boomers are now picking up and following that, so they're supporting it, so that's positive. Most people, I think I saw a stat that 75% of people in Asia who want to leave money want their money to be used for good. That's one of their investment criteria, or their inheritance criteria in wills and so on. So, I mean, that's very positive. So you've got technology changes. So we've seen some profound, using that word a lot at the moment, but that's what it's all about, changes in technology. So I think, something energy. So you've got battery power, the old Moore's law for computers. What we're seeing with batteries, I mean, it's outstripping Moore's law from what I understand. Solar power, again, changing that. You've got hydrogen and other power sources coming in. So that's really positive. China's just blown away some of the targets in terms of their shift to modern green energy and so on, and just blew everyone out of the water. I mean, they exceeded it by something like 75% in half the time. I mean, it's staggering what they've been able to do. So there's proof that if they put the mind to it. I've just been watching a very interesting series by a guy called Tony Seba. Now, he's just one source, and of course, but it's worth having, if you find it on YouTube, Tony Seba. He talks about discontinuance, and in my game, we always talk about adoption models, about how fast new technology will be picked up. That's right. So you get early adopters, and then you get through the inflection point, and then the majority sort of follow on. What he talks about are discontinuance models, because we always think about adoption because it's all about growth, and that's how people are going to pick up new products. He's talking about discontinuance. So his contention is that oil and energy won't just be a slow decay like everyone's hoping, and the boomers and current investors are hoping. If you put it in the context of shift of money going to Gen Zers, they don't want oil, they don't want these old models, they want new technologies. Nuclear, you mentioned before, may or may not, it's obviously very loaded. But he's talking about discontinuance terms that are almost immediate, so in very short time frames. Now that's positive. So for Gen Zers and millennials, I think if they can hang on through this, maybe it's a media job, to promote the more positive future that's on the way if they start getting this stuff to stick, the stuff that the Gen Zers want to do.
I think it's interesting to mention that these generations tend to mellow out, you would say. Like follow the next generation, but the core of it is still sustainability and more awareness, at least for like the investments or the way they buy or the way they spend money is more kinder to the environment, things like that. And I do find that that's something that's on, at least I see in my peer group, or at least for myself, maybe it's not as explicitly like, oh, this is green, that's what everyone buy, but understanding that what the company stands for, and also understanding like if there are.
It's got to start somewhere. I mean, it's very interesting to say. So the general stats in US market, but 90% of Gen Zers and millennials have done something in the last month which is towards a greener, more sustainable planet. So whether that's changing what they eat, I mean, in the food industry. So, middle Americans, you think that alternative proteins, so plant-based meats and Oatly type oat milks and so on, would only be in the fringe of the US, the sort of the blue markets around the fringe of the US. But it's not. 60% of US households have had a plant-based product in their house in the last, I think it's 6 weeks or something like that. And, a penetration of say, plant-based milks is like 40%. It's staggering, the speed with which these are coming in. So, I can see that.
How much was it, like, let's say 3 years back or 5 years back?
Oh, a lot lower. I mean, US is well ahead in terms of this, the most advanced of the plant-based alternative protein markets. But, I mean, we're talking about low penetrations, probably in the low teens 3 years ago.
It's about a 3-4-fold increase.
Oh, yeah, and surprisingly so. But I think, again, we talk about adoption curves, how much of this is actually because everyone's getting on board and realising it, and then how much of it is you just get to the wall where it becomes a generational change. And I think, again, coming full circle, the generation change is coming. The Gen Zers are here to save the world sort of thing, and even the alphas and the late millennials. So the receipt of all of this money will empower them to not only quash a lot of their immediate debt. This is assuming that the boomers don't live so long with too much debt accumulated in their living longer than they expected type phase. But the Gen Zers and the millennials will get the money. They can put it where they can cover off their debts. They can put it towards their retirement, into their causes and into their innovation. And how it pans out, I don't think anyone really knows. But potential there for massive change to happen very quickly, and to profound, as I said, I can use that word again, to profoundly change what this world is like is coming up in the next 10 to 15 years. Be very different.
So you do see some form of massive disruption in multiple spheres of society, right?
Yeah, so
Driven by
disruption's a great
technology.
word. I do. I mean, look at AI. Okay, so again, they're talking about the adoption of AI, whereas everything used to be exponential adoption. You go
Yeah.
through the inflection point and so on. Pretty much, they're saying it's double exponential, whatever that is. So it's pretty much a vertical adoption curve. It went from 0 to 1 million users inside a week. Happily, I was one of those million for ChatGPT, and been living on it. But the rate now we're all doing AI. I mean, spend half your time, you do your research on Perplexity and do it on something else, and get your images from one. I'm using 10 different AI software every day to pull stuff. Writing content and rewriting it myself. I'm using it to check ideas to make sure I haven't missed anything. It's a collective universal brain. So we're seeing rates of change which are very different to anything we've seen before. There's downsides to AI, which we don't know yet.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of fear around that. There's upsides to it, which are spectacular if it's done well. So I think that it's a very, you've got to go glass half full here, and you've got to say people they're not going to, even though we always act against our own best interests some of the time. I don't think as a mass we do it all of the time. We smoke when you know you shouldn't smoke. You drink when you know you shouldn't drink. Yeah, fine, but there's a sort of sort of balancing argument for that. But en masse, I think we're here for the long term, and we will make decisions in favour of long term, I think. So you've got to be fairly optimistic about it, and I think the technology is going to rush us into that direction.
When you say rush, you mean is it going to be very organized or structured, or is it going to be?
Well,
the next day?
I'm not a futurist. I mean,
cars are
I tend to
flying.
believe that things tend to build. I mean, I believe in more sedimentary approaches, but a lot of the thinkers are saying no, which is the point of the discussion, is that it's actually going to be much more. It's going to be far more rapid than we've expected. I mean, look at the uptake of electric cars. I mean, everyone was going, "Oh, who wants to drive an electric car? They're quiet. There's no fun. Where's the noise?" That, and then all of a sudden they've got hyperdrive on a Tesla and it's out dragging things down drag strips. So everyone goes, "Wow, I want some of that." So the moment that they can make a new technology relevant and sexy, and it it gives you the guilt-free aspect of what you've always wanted to do, which is a lot of what sustainability is about. It's about achieving the quality of life you want, but doing it in a way that removes the guilt.
Yeah.
As long as the technologies allow you to do that, then you'll get rapid acceptance of them. The penetration of the population will be very quick.
Yeah, I want to link that back to in terms of investing and also sustainability. So obviously since COVID, the 2020, we have a massive crash, and then we see a recovery, especially in certain tech stocks, like for example Tesla, almost tenfold. In 2020, we see a huge resurgence in solar, green energy companies as well. So there's that aspect of long-term or disruptive transformation that's happening in our society, but there's also the financial aspect as well, which in my opinion was not as sustainable, because right after that huge rally, we see many of these companies crash, except for a few giants like say Tesla, which has at least managed to maintain its market price. Like, what are your views on that in trying to reconcile the actual societal transformation and that being reflected in investing?
Okay, so I'm not a financial specialist, but so let's look at COVID. What happened there? So COVID created a complete reassessment of people's values because we were forced to be locked down. Things like community, health, general well-being, family became very strong, and the sensibilities around, wow, something out of the blue can come and destroy our lives. Now, in this case, it was a virus, but it could be environmental, floods or water levels or something like that. The reality of these things became quite tangible to people. And so consequently, we've seen a shift in values, and there has been some sort of rebound. back, so there was a more extreme shift early post-COVID, and then now people are settled back into sort of a more middle.
Yeah.
But new energies, and this is aligned with the progress that was made during those times. These companies weren't sitting still. They were developing and innovating at a rate of knots that was incredible. So you've got, one hand, you've got positive value shift, technological shift coming together, and then you're seeing rapid adoption. You also saw a lot of experimentation post-COVID with people and pent up money, pent up demand, pent up keenness to be out there, taking a lot of money into a lot of industries. And then, of course, we hit the financial brakes as interest rates start to go up and the cost of money goes up, and the freedom, the amount of money that's been poured into lots of experimentation starts to dry up a bit. And so a lot of these new technologies have had to pull back and not do the things, not take as much risk as they probably would in order to survive until this is over. And a lot of the startups I work with are in the same sort of boat. They're having to be more practical in their business management as opposed to the hyperzealous technological management that they would have been applying otherwise. So what's that mean for investing? So I think, first of all, that's going to be a reality of the finance, so where we are with that sort of spend. But you do have a new value system. It is underpinning the way that people are going to be investing. In future, ESG and all of that will be prereqs that you need to be fantastic. And if you're a laggard company that's too slow in adopting, or you're doing your purpose washing, greenwashing, all of those sorts of things you mentioned before, you will be quickly found out because information is free and it's fast, and you will be dumped on your backside unceremoniously very quickly. I think that's going to be one thing. And then transparency. Perceived transparency and then finding it's actually opaque. Anything where you do, you'll be found out very quickly. So you've got to be quite honest and authentic in the way that you deliver your story to the market. From an investment point of view, what's going to happen? The nature of the experience that you guys are used to from technology, we talk about the metaverse, okay?
Right.
So the metaverse is sort of stumbling into existence. People are still trying to work out. But it's quite possible you guys are used to a much greater experience and much greater conversation between your brands that you buy into and yourself. So whereas we would have gone through more of a stage and purchased it and then our life with the brand would exist, you're demanding a lot more dialogue with the brand all the way down the pathway. So I could conceivably see that these younger investors are going to be looking at more of an investment experience. So everything from education to conversation to being updated in real time wherever they are, to going into the world and exploring the companies in a way. So it's not inconceivable that in the metaverse, Javelin could exist. You could say, well, here's a company that we're looking at, and you could put on your VR goggles or your glasses or whatever the technology is at the time and go in there, and you could see the information, you could see what they're doing, you could get a feel for what they're like, you could see presentation. You can get all of this stuff a much greater, deeper feel, all delivered in virtual. I mean, there's a lot of potential for this to create worlds and understanding and an experience of investing that's much more three-dimensional than the two-dimensional or even one-dimensional as it was in the past, where an advisor told you what you should do and you put the money there. Now it's become sort of more of a dialogue, but it could be much more sense around going forward. So I think the whole investment world's going to change. One stat that's really for your business, which is really critical, is that 80% of Gen Zers say that they're likely to change their investment advisor when they receive their money, because they don't from their parents' investment advisor, because they don't believe that their parents' investment advisor has an understanding of the current world in the way that these new fangled investment advisors can. So that says that you need to change with the times and bring in these more empathetic and comprehensive and more sense around investment experiences. People are people, in my belief. You can never take the human out of it. It's always got to be there. And even if you do, so in retail, in brand experience and retail design and all of that sort of discipline, we follow this simple model. So you've got the PhD, think of it as a PhD, physical, human, and digital. And experiences can be dialed up on the physical, so like an environment, and they may have physical and digital, which is like you'd experience in a store or something like that, where you're interacting in the physical space, and that. You might have human only, which is like a concierge or something like that, and maybe humans and digital, maybe human and physical. So you've got these three areas. Now, I think you always have to have the human aspect of it. You need to look for the human aspect in any sort of touch point that you're creating around investment experience. So if you keep that mindset, the human is never out of there. But yes, you're right. So it'll be much more digital, but digital where it's needed, not just digital for digital's sake. Only where it enhances the experience.
Yeah, I think it's going to be quite different in terms of what the next generation is expecting, because at the same time they want to be able to have someone who relates or be empathetic at least, but at the same time they want the information at their fingertips. So obviously your human advisor is not going to be there 24/7 to answer questions on, say, a specific company's earnings at 2 a.m.
But come back to the AI thing. Yeah. So the AI for chatbots, I mean, the chatbots are getting smarter and smarter and smarter and much more responsive. There is no reason why, and this could be done right now, is that you can understand you could program the chatbot with the information around the desires and the propensities of that individual investor. And it could analyse all of that. It could then also find out information of people that are like that, and it could come back and make personalised recommendations without you. You'd still be overseeing it, but it can do a lot of the day-to-day interaction. Conceivably, I don't know anyone who's doing this, but it's probably happening. But it's not unrealistic to think that for a large, you can use the technology to tailor a personal experience to people, and then add the humanity and the touch and the wisdom and the validation on top of that. So you can build efficiencies using the technology, but then build touch from effective use of the people that you've got.
Yeah, I see some parallels between how the social media, they use algorithms to feed you what you like, and also maybe reduce what you don't pay as much attention to. In the same way, it's going to feed into how new people have an investment experience, right? Because in the past, investment is more like a process, but now you're coining it to be more like an experience.
Yeah, that's right. So process. So it's not. It seemed to be a very sequential sort of concept. You did this, you learned that, you made that investment, you checked out how it went. And there was a feedback loop. Okay, well that didn't work. Let's do something else, sort of thing. I think now it's going to be far more responsive, far more immediate, far more real time. I think there was one other point I was going to make there, which is that the echo chamber. So I think there's a real danger with social media. The biggest downside of social media, the biggest downside of algorithms is, and this is where the internet's bad, is that you lack your exposure. See, one of the beautiful things, this is like in the advertising game, when we had one TV channel and everyone saw the same ad, some people would already be in that category, others weren't, but then went, wow, I didn't really know about that, and I saw it. So you're being introduced to new things. The problem with the echo chamber is that it only feeds up stuff that you're predisposed to, which it thinks you're predisposed to. And so therefore it tends, and this, we're seeing this in politics and stuff like that, it tends to reinforce your current views. Now, advertising doesn't sell. What it does, it typically reinforces your existing preconceptions about something, and therefore it strengthens that. And that's what the algorithm does. It tends to create more of the same. And so you're less exposed rather than more exposed to other things. Even though you feel like you're more exposed to stuff, you're actually less exposed to new ideas. And that's a problem, I think.
So the challenge is bringing in an opposing idea or something that at least brings you some cognitive dissonance into how you look at life, or even your investments or your spending habits.
And that's where I think the human side of the investment advisory can help, because if you look at something like YouTube has a little button on the top like new to you. Now, you don't know how new that is because they're still controlling the algorithm, what they present to you. But the idea that you can break out of your little circle and see different stuff, and it improves its algorithm by every time you click on something that's of interest that's not in what they thought of you, they expand their understanding of you. I think and again, you don't know, it's the future, it'll find its own way, but with investment, you can have the algorithm doing the basic functional stuff that's low value, and then you could be introducing the new ideas because of your more empathetic human understanding of where they are and what they are in their life, what their needs might be. That you could be enhancing that there. Now, algorithms, obviously, AI is getting so smart it can probably pre-guess 99% of those, but you're never going to remove the creativity and the nuance that humans can bring and the empathy.
But back to the question on different generations, right? You talked a lot about how they're different from the boomers, how they are more equipped. I wouldn't say necessarily better educated. What are the other pitfalls for them when it comes to handling the wealth transfer and also how they're investing?
Okay. Well, first of all, I would say, in terms of stats, the number of people who've got tertiary education, they are better educated. But are they more worldly in terms of their education? That would be the big question, I think. In terms of what's the implications for investment, again, I come back to the thing. You know, if I was investing money now and looking forward and wondering where to put it, you'd be looking at making sure that you're not putting it into industries which have got a rapid chance of discontinuance. Obviously, I mean, just not that it's any big news for investors like yourself, you know, but it means that the factors with which you make that assessment are going to change radically. Whereas previously it might have been financial or structural or geopolitical, now they're going to be a lot more social and morality, you know, social and environmentally moral-based, values-based, and I think that's going to change. And I think, so if there's going to be a big shift, it's going to be away from sort of more objective, this will be objective measures, obviously, in terms of the way that they measure ESG, attainability, and so on. But it's going to be a different set of measures to what we've been used to in the past. And less about profit in the pure return sense and more about social and environmental good, as well as profit. I mean, it's not that profit doesn't disappear. Everyone still wants to make more money. Gen Zers and millennials are still money focused. I mean, in many ways, they're more money focused than some of the other generations, but their focus is on how they use their money. And it's, as I said, it's much more about, it's not about luxury and flashiness and that, it's more about experiences, it's about quality, it's about preserving life and not doing harm to the planet. Very different set of drivers.
Yeah, I think part of that could be influenced by their parents as well, maybe in a positive way or in a negative way. But in terms of when they are transferring over, I think there's an aspect of also how well it's being transferred in terms of, let's say, we're seeing a lot of family governance that's being structured into, say, family offices for the next gen as well. How does that affect, at least for the next gen? Like how well does the baton being passed on?
Yeah, I think the upsurge in family offices, I think the change in the nature of family offices is quite interesting. So before you had the very high threshold, it was always something that was done only by the uber rich. But now what you're getting is you've got a next tier down where the thresholds and entry thresholds, even in Singapore, the new family offices, I understand about $500,000 as being entry. What was surprising, I was reading, is that even globally, most of the family offices, about a third of family offices are dealing with handling the wealth management for 3 generations. A third are handling the wealth generation for 2 generations, a third for only 1 generation. And that's, give or take, pretty consistent across the globe. There's slight differences between Asia and the rest of the world. But so, what's interesting is that this mindset of that needing to get external managers to manage and preserve wealth through the generations is starting to take hold. Even if it's still, I mean, $500,000 is still relatively elite in the greater context of world wealth. But it does penetrate a long way down the actual total quantum of wealth that there is on the planet. Because such a small group owns so much of the wealth, and you can cover those off by dropping the entry threshold for family offices and advice only a little bit. You start to get much wider part of the pyramid. So I think what's going to happen. I think the process is already underway. We're starting to make it more of inheritance management, and longevity is much more of a discipline than perhaps it has been in the past. And the discipline is less one way. It's a dialogue. It's a family. It's a total strategy. It's much more engaged. As I said, it's much more 360 degree in terms of the experience.
I think we've covered quite a lot in the developed nation wise and also Asia. Or if we look at let's say Africa or even South America,
Right.
like they're not exactly as affluent as the other nations.
No.
Do you see that trend coming, or do you see them like the next Asia? And
Wow, that's a tough one. It's not really my area of expertise. I don't tend to do a lot of thinking for Africa or LATAM. There will still be needs to. Well, first of all, I think there's still influence pathways. So as more and more they're into media understanding, global media and exposure, I think that they'll start to understand these concepts. But I think from a wealth point of view and wealth transfer, I don't think they're part of. They'll be more of the impact of it. So, and one of the arguments here is that, and this has always been the argument of like China and developing nations, why are we having to start paying the bills of the wealthy nations when we haven't even had our time in the sun? And I think that's going to be very true for, say, African nations and LATAM, underdeveloped South American nations, because they've still got to go through that area where they can get their GDP per capita. I mean, the question in the future is GDP per capita the right measure of well-being? I'm anti sort of growth mentality nowadays. I'm trending in that direction. I tend to think that that's one measure, but it's not a great measure. I think there's probably much better measures out there. But I think they're still going to want their day in the sun before they're forced to. They're going to want their big steaks and their and water wastage and all the other things. But that's what you would think. Although it's very interesting that a lot of the developing countries are actually moving quite fast in the sustainability direction.
Yeah, I think one of the ways they, at least also for the next generation, are looking at maximizing, let's say GDP per capita is not exactly the average, but they're trying to raise the median.
Yeah.
Right. So it's more towards a social good, and I do think like aspects in Africa or even, let's say even Rwanda has some interesting renewable programs that they are enforcing as well.
Amazing stuff. I think complications here, I mean, this is just supposition, is, so take China, for example. So China's moving towards common prosperity, this concept.
Yeah.
And what they're seeing, and they're trying to control, is the flight of capital out to, which is why Singapore is doing so well. I think that corruption is always going to be a very big factor in this for developing nations, because you've got the very small echelon at the top who have most of the money, and they're going to be putting that elsewhere. So I'm not sure that favours the country, and it takes a fair amount of wealth to be able to change onto new technologies, unfortunately. So I think that they need to get to a certain economies of scale that they can be easily adopted by these nations before we really have that effect. So I mean, that's really as I said, thinking well beyond where I need to think for most of the work that I'm doing.
Yeah, I think the word common prosperity is also kind of interesting, because in millennials there's this term called millennial socialism. So we've been seeing a rise in interest in socialism, at least in the past few years. And I think most of it is also driven by the disappointment in late stage capitalism. But without diving too deep into politics or economics, right, do you see that this kind of pervasion of socialism, do you see it like being more enforced across? Being more popular?
So I mean, so a couple of points. So first of all, absolutely right. So the propensity, or it seems to be, that millennials and Gen Zers are more likely to, in the American context, to be Democrats. Okay, that's one thing that seems to be shifting. So without talking politics now, I don't have a lot of base for that, but I was reading it, and there seems to be the number of research papers that indicate that's the direction. So millennial socialism, interesting term. I think that things like socialism and that they feel to me like not the right terms for what the new concept is, because I think there's the capitalistic mentality that innovation and growth and technology and investing and successful, more efficient, more effective solutions should win out. So there's that sort of mentality, as opposed to right the other end, which is the idea that we should dumb it down and make it even across everybody. So I think sharing of wealth is aligned to, and minimum wage and fair trade and all of these things are aligned to this new value system that the younger generations are bringing through, accelerated by COVID, obviously. So I think what we're heading for is a smarter version. Capitalism is almost too hard, but it's got that. It's a sort of democratic capitalism, if you could call it that. It's more, well, democratic's not even the right word for it. It's a much more evenly spread at a base level. So minimum living wage, all of that sort of stuff, I think will start to come in. But it's not just about money. It's about quality of life. It's about attaining an environment, living in an environment that's not going to kill you. That's where I see the changes happening. And come back to investment. If you're going to put your money with things, you're going to have to look at the ESG aspects, because ESG not only will be the companies and businesses that are receiving the money, but they also represent industries that are more sustainable in the long term by definition, and so therefore less risk. So it's a win-win from an investment point of view.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is still that element of capitalism that people want to see. Is there's still profits to be involved. There's still profits that they want to maximize, but not at the cost of the environment.
That's right.
Or things like that. So, maybe millennial socialism is too overarching and a concept on.
I think it's a bit of best of they're cherry picking bits of each. As I said, I'm not quite sure. There probably is a term for it, but I don't have it. But I find that the old definitions and words we use probably don't quite capture it well. I think there's probably a need for a new concept.
But in your opinion, if you have children, right?
Yep.
Yeah. What kind of world do you want them to live in?
Safe, clean, equal, and equal in terms of treatment of people, but equal in terms of opportunities and meritocracy. I think that, but nice meritocracy, not where it's a dog-eat-dog one, but more of if you're doing good and if you're achieving well, and that, and the other one is I think just an understanding that the diminishing returns of wealth gain. That you rapidly gain quality of life to a certain point, and then it just becomes static, the growth. And I think we need to have a much better people need to have a mental concept of where that point is for their lives and be satisfied with that, rather than chasing extra assets and capital and what have you without any material gain for the population. So I think it's almost as if a socialistic or mentality kicked in after a certain level of wealth growth, that would be ideal. So you grow, and then bang, you sit into sort of adequate wealth. I think that would be nice, but that's a dream concept.
I think many things it's a dream, but I think people are actually working towards that, or trying to pursue that in some form of fashion.
That's right. So coming back to your point before about Gen Zers, I think you've got to be optimistic. I mean, I think it's positive. I think, I think there's a lot of things happening which are going to surprise us at how things are in the right direction. I think, and the question is, because there's always going to be the people saying fear, the sky's falling.
Yeah.
But if you look at, as I said, the money, the wealth transfer, the technology, a lot of these indicators are pointing in the right direction. It's not going to be easy, and it shouldn't be, because I think if it's easy, then people will forget it just as quickly. Won't value the gains that are made. But I think that it's all heading there, and I think that it's all going to happen in the next few years, and so I'm not that massively worried. I'm very confident in people's ability to adapt their own behaviour for the greater good in the end, when they're forced to. And that's what's happening now.
Do you think it'll be too late, by then, or do you think by 2 days efforts or 2 days pace we will be able to?
I'm not qualified to answer that, but What's interesting is that there are commentators who are saying that some of the most detrimental aspects of life are going to be all over, coal and oil energy over by 2030. Again, Tony Seba, if you listen to that now, he's sort of debunked by others. But wow, he seems to be able to support it. He's been pretty right with his previous predictions. You go, okay, well, that's good. That's not too far away. 7 years is going to happen like that.
Yeah.
And you go, wow, okay, well, I'm going to be shocked by the change. I don't believe that the world can change that fast. I think it has to be much more gradual. That's shocking by any measure. Yeah.
So I think we've covered a lot on like wealth transfer and the next generation. What are 3 themes that you think people have to pay attention to, at least in the next 5 to 10 years?
3 themes in the investment context?
Within the context of like the wealth transfer you're talking about and the next generation.
I think the themes are, one, watch sustainability and watch how much that impacts everything. I think it's an easy word to bandy around, but I think it's going to be very, very influential. However it's delivered, so ESG, those sorts of mentalities, I think that's going to be one thing that's going to be guiding thought progressively. Secondly, obviously technology change. I think the rates of change of technological innovation are just going to get out of control, and that's coming together with sustainability. And then thirdly is the ability to be, and whether this is tied with education or not, I'm not sure you can train people with this, but I think we need to be more. Who was it? It's Darwin, I think, who said that it's not the it's the ones who survive are the ones who are able to adapt to change the fastest. And I think the ability to adapt to change has never been more important. So I think change management is going to be the most important thing.
I think that sums up our conversation.
Great.
All right. Thank you for your time, Andrew.
My pleasure. Thank you.